In June of 1698, Moses Levy made his first recorded appearance in Stamford. In the 1730s, Jacob and David Hayes bought what is now called the Bush Holly House. Almost 3 centuries later, in March of 2015, Marc Chagall's granddaughter came to Stamford and gave us some extraordinary insights into his work and his life. In between those dates come the stories about us, about Dr. Jacob Nemointon saving lives in Stamford, and Irwin Miller and Eileen Nemointon risking their lives in the Second World War, about Eric Pleskow and Arnold Yellen, who worked with some of the leading stars in Hollywood. And did you know that Milton Mann attended the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal, and Arthur Koffler met with Egypt's Anwar Sadat, or that Golda Meir bought shoes from Jack Skydell's store?
My son was involved at Road of Shalom with a trip to Israel. Now she's the prime minister by now, right? And she had all these kids in the room, and she wanted to know what their name was. So it comes to him, he said, "My name is Seth Skydell." She says, "My slippers come from your store."
And Ellie and Mort Lowenthal met with the Pope.
He's a very congenial person, and you can talk to him. You know, he's very interested in.
Who told them what he wears when he goes skiing. What do all these people have in common? They're all Jewish. They're all part of Fairfield County. And without the Jewish Historical Society, you wouldn't know any of their stories. It all began, really, with a newspaper article.
I first became aware of American Jewish history in 1937 when I read an obituary in the Brooklyn Eagle about the mother of Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, the president and publisher of the New York Times, who passed away that year. And it said she was descended from early Jewish settlers who were farmers in Westchester County, New York. And I had no idea that Jews were even here at that time, because in school, especially in elementary school, you learned about the Dutch and the English and so forth, and they were the ones who settled the country, and Jews weren't even anywhere. So when I read that, I first made me aware that hey, there probably were these early Jewish settlers.
And the rest, as they say, is history.
That flagpole was the site of a landing where 23 Jews landed September 7, 1654.
But it's our history, stories about us. Like Eileen Nemointon's story about war. In September of 1943, under the cover of darkness, Nurse Eileen Nemointon's troop carrier began a 10-day trip across the Atlantic to set up an army hospital in England.
The 9th day out, we were attacked by a German plane. And we had big guns on our boat. And they replied back, and it left. And then we had to worry about it coming back.
Mm-hmm.
But the weather was with us because the fog closed in and they couldn't find us, so we made it to Scotland.
But while Eileen treated the war casualties, and in her spare time played cards with future movie star Jimmy Stewart, Irwin Miller was on his way to Saipan to help prepare for the invasion of Okinawa.
The first time I saw a kamikaze, he came overhead. We were in, this is Okinawa, and I look up, and he was so close. I look up and I see the rising sun, and he was heading for us. And I must have been just frozen because he was so close. I could see it plainly. He was trying to hit us, but he hit. We were in formation of division, like squadrons, divisions, and he overshot us and hit the ship abreast of us like that.
The war had a profound effect on so many local residents. Milton Mann was in Germany with the American occupation forces. That experience led him to the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal.
It was very strange as a Jew to be sitting next to the people that perpetrated what they did.
But it also formed the background for a lifetime of service to the community by both Milton and his wife Norma. Arnold Yellen's service during the Korean War was just a little different. As an experienced newspaper photographer for The Advocate, Arnold was assigned as a photographer in Tokyo, never imagining that when Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio got married, they would take their honeymoon in Japan.
I had got an assignment, I rigged an assignment as it was, to meet the plane that came in with them on it and take pictures of Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio and everybody else is arriving. And there was such a crowd of fans around the steps leading from the airplane that they couldn't get them off the plane through the steps. So I went around the back of the plane and they brought her out of the escape hatch at the bottom of the plane. I followed her back to the hotel and I got pictures of her in her room. First thing she got was a massage from a Japanese masseuse. And then I got a call from my commanding officer. He says, we have to get a picture for her Geneva Convention card. When she came in for her picture, she was wearing a very low V-neck. And at the time, I don't know if you remember, women used to use fake moles. I used to paste them in various parts of it.
I remember.
Marilyn Monroe had twin moles right on the inside of each bosom with her low, and it was, now mind you, I apologize. Nothing was said until I got home about a year later and I was sitting at the Palace Theater watching a movie with Marilyn Monroe and she comes out in an evening gown and all of a sudden noticing two twin moles and blurring out in the middle of the theater. My God, they're real.
The life of Stanford's Eric Pleskow was also shaped by war. In his case, again, World War II. Born in Austria, his family escaped over the Rhine River at the last possible moment, on the last train to cross the German-French border.
Train was stopped, searched, people forced back onto the train and kept me back and kind of sliced open my lining, saying I'm carrying money. Of course I didn't. But the train left. So my parents, of course, went crazy. Figured they'll never see me again. And then they made me walk across the Rhine.
The family made their way to the U.S., where the teenaged Eric joined the Army. Then came one of the highlights of his life, crossing the Rhine for the second time, this time with the victorious American Army.
So the moment crossing back, going back,
great.
crossing the Rhine, victorious, having defeated the Germans,
Yes.
must have been
yeah,
quite an extraordinary.
it wasn't quite over, but it was clearly over.
Right.
Clearly over, and I was going across the Rhine in a different fashion.
Right.
On a Jeep, it was much better than walking.
In Europe, Pleskow was assigned to the intelligence unit.
My job was to interrogate German prisoners of war, which was, for me, of course, a wonderful experience. For them, a little less so.
He worked next as an Army filmmaker, documenting the death sentences carried out against German war criminals and accepting every difficult media assignment the Army offered him.
He said, well, I'll tell you what, can you run a studio?
He ran the studio.
I was 21 at that time. And I figured I'll say yes, because what can it be? I mean, what's the big deal? If I can't do it, they'll get rid of me, but they're not going to execute me.
After his discharge, he joined and ultimately became president of the United Artists Movie Studio. There, he won 3 Best Picture Oscars in a row for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Rocky, and Annie Hall, a feat never before accomplished. After a similar success story at Orion Studios, this former Austrian refugee was named the president of Vienna's annual film festival. His advice for success is straightforward.
Try everything, say yes to everything. don't be afraid of a challenge, and try to be honest in a dishonest world.
That theme, don't be afraid of a challenge, comes through again and again in the Jewish community's archives. Like with Evelyn Fowler. Originally an artist, she was rejected from Columbia's engineering school because they said that at the ripe old age of 22, she was just too old for that sort of thing. So,
I tried the Polytechnic Institute in Brooklyn, and they were very nice, but they said, we're sorry, we can't take you because we haven't got any women's toilets. Whatever. So I said,
you didn't offer to use the men's.
You know, it never occurred to me. In those days, you wouldn't do things like that. I probably wouldn't have gone then.
Right.
Anyhow, so I said, look, and go to Pratt. So I went over to Pratt, and they had an engineering school at that time, which is now closed. They no longer have the school. And there was no problem. I was applied, I got in, and I went to engineering school.
there's also Dr. Carolyn Koffler, who was one of only 6 women graduates in NYU's 1936 med school class, and who went on to get a public health degree at Yale.
Did you know that it was not easy for a woman to get into medical school?
I didn't know that. I didn't pay any attention to that. This was what I was going to be. And I just wasn't aware of any obstacles.
And when she did encounter obstacles, she fought back. She was part of the group that for the first time in history convinced Mayor LaGuardia to actually pay New York doctors while they were interns.
I have a picture with our coming down the steps of City Hall trying to have a bill passed that would pay $1,000 a year to an intern in New York City hospitals.
They weren't paid at all
That
then?
we were paid nothing.
Just got
And
fed.
what LaGuardia did was to give us $15 a month. My father was so proud. That was the first money I'd ever made. He framed the $15 check. He never cashed it.
The discrimination that others faced was based on religion. Even Stanford's renowned Dr. Jacob Nemoitin encountered it.
Yeah, the community had anti-Semitism. Dr. DeMoyton recounts it on his tape. He couldn't get admission on the staff of Stanford Hospital for years, and he attributed that to one of the head nurses there, or whatever.
There was a superintendent at that time, a certain Mrs. Wilson, who was in charge of the hospital, and for some reason she, I believe, did not have much sympathy for Jewish people. She, at least it was, I thought that was the case with me. And every opportunity that she had, she made it very hard for me.
Stanford's Ellie Lowenthal was an avid skater and sailor, living her early years in Larchmont. Her father was actually knighted by the Pope for his outstanding work with the Catholic Church. But because of anti-Semitism, Ellie found door after door closed in her face.
I couldn't join any skating clubs in the area at all. Couldn't join any yacht clubs. I was a sailor. Could not join any yacht clubs at all. We lived right near the Larchmont Yacht Club. I was not allowed to walk in the building with my friends. I had to stay outside. It was just constant.
As in Larchmont, the Stamford Yacht Club at that time also had a reputation for discrimination. But in 1940, one man chose to fight back. Walter Wheeler Jr., the non-Jewish CEO of Pitney Bowes, was a leading member of the Stamford Yacht Club and the president of the Long Island Sound Yacht Racing Association. But in May of 1940, Wheeler wrote a letter of resignation to the club, explicitly detailing the club's discriminatory practices and making an extraordinary stand of principle against them. Wheeler wanted to loan his boat to a good friend for the summer. But to do that, the friend would need launch service from the club to get to and from the boat. Wheeler wrote,
I was sure my friend was perfectly willing to join the club and pay the usual dues and fees, and I would have been only too glad to propose him, except for the fact that he is a Jew by race, and I knew the past attitude of a great many members of the club in that regard. Therefore I'd thought that something might be worked out to permit him to use the launch service as my guest, in the same manner as is the customary practice. I explained to you that my friend was one of very long standing, the senior partner of an otherwise Gentile law firm of high reputation in New York City, a man of the very highest integrity, modesty, and cultural background, who had for a number of years taken a great deal of interest in civic matters in Stamford, and who is highly respected in the community and loved for what he is by all who know him. You later called me back and told me you discussed it informally with a number of the directors, all of whom had agreed that nothing whatever could or should be done to care for the situation, solely and simply because my friend was a Jew. The actual expression was, the club cannot afford to have Jews seen in its launches. We're living through a period when Europe is literally being torn apart by wholesale slaughter on a scale never before conceived. Few will deny that the root of this world situation is bedded in intolerance, racial prejudices, and our failure to give much more than lip service to the principles of true democracy and Christianity. I realize that the prejudice in the Stamford Yacht Club against Jews has existed in the majority of other similar clubs, but we have reached the point where a great effort should be made to amend this callous and dangerous policy. To exclude a Jew without consideration, just because he is a Jew by race, basically amounts to the same type of treatment as most of us criticize in Nazi Germany. If I am to remain a member of the Stamford Yacht Club, I must ask that the board establish a policy that should any member propose a Jew, he will be carefully considered and investigated, the decision to be reached entirely on his character and merit as an individual, that he will not be excluded solely and simply because he is a Jew.
Wheeler's policy was defeated, and he resigned. As Eric Pleskow would say, he was a man who was not afraid of a challenge and who insisted on being honest in a dishonest world. There's so much more to tell about Dr. Harry Romanowitz performing a sample circumcision on public TV.
We're about to perform a mock circumcision on this wonderful infant who won't be crying much because he really is a mannequin.
About Julian Padowitz escaping through the mountains from Poland.
We climbed on all fours. At the top of the mountain, we were finally out of Poland and out of the Soviet clutches. But where were we?
About Harriet Brynon opening up her Strawberry Hill medicine cabinet to quite a surprise.
I discovered one day that if you open the medicine cabinet, at the same time your neighbor opened his medicine cabinet, I learned that he had a yellow terry cloth bathrobe.
Telling these stories about all of us is what we at the Jewish Historical Society do. But there's so much more to tell.